We have done a lot of research where we have discussed this terrible terrorist crime, which, in fact, from the point of view of international law, of course, is a war crime, to which there is no forgiveness and no understanding. If we talk about the Western reaction, there were absolutely no surprises for us. The fact is that the West has long been waging a hybrid war against the Russian Federation, and its significant part, if not the main one, is the information and propaganda war. And in fact, these terrible events, this terrible crime, became another testimony to the hypocrisy of the West. And I can't even say double standards, because it's too weak. But this war psychosis, which is being instilled on purpose in order to create more favorable conditions for the implementation of the political goal, is the containment of Russia, its infliction on the Ukrainian theater of military defeat, economic stifling, and so on and so forth. Today, we see drones falling into the Baltic countries or being shot down. But just recently, Ursula von der Leyen visited the Baltic countries and also said that it was Russia's fault, that it was the result of Russia's aggression. Russia does not say a word that its Ukrainian accomplices are violating or using the corridors provided by these countries. The Ukrainian regime is already posing a threat to the strategic communication of the West in the Mediterranean. These are the rules that are being established in this information and psychological war. And I'll say it again, it's not a surprise, but we will strive for the truth. We will not allow the West to take its own responsibility in all these crimes. And we will continue our line because it is the only fair one. And if someone in the West really wants to advance in the direction of a political diplomatic solution, then, of course, all these crimes must be given a completely principled assessment, because without this, there can be no real movement towards regulation. It reminds me not even of the Second World War, but of the First World War, and I'm going to protect myself from Russia, which is about to attack. In fact, yes, all these territories, including Gotland, Finnish Lapland, and the Norwegian province of Finnmark, now the archipelago of Spitsbergen, not to mention the territories of Poland and Estonia, are included in the so-called defensive plans of the alliance, which are being implemented today. But in fact, it is quite clear to us that all this is being done in order to create the potential for military pressure on Russia from the northern direction, to deprive us of access to strategic communications, to create pressure on our strategic forces, which are located on the Kola Peninsula. By and large, we are being forced to divert part of our military resources to this direction, which has always been secondary to us, after the era of confrontation, as it seemed to everyone, ended in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and thus it was necessary to weaken Russia. In addition, of course, this is an attempt to economic stranglehold, to draw us into a Cold War, and all this is accompanied by a military psychosis. Any such attempts to either block Kaliningrad or, as you say, to capture it, will lead to the most severe consequences for those who carry out these plans. And here I would like to emphasize once again, we have all the necessary resources, inexpensive but very effective, in order to show, first of all, the impracticality of these plans, and by the way, the recent exercises that we conducted together with our Belarusian colleagues show that we have a palette of appropriate funds. And the second is to really show that we have the determination not to allow this. The West has always been very good with the cause and effect relations, right? They are now saying that they tried, in this terrible situation with Ostrobelsk, they tried to take over the initiative and say that Russia suddenly struck Kiev, although everyone knows, even if you look at the statistics of losses, that these were point strikes on those objects that were announced by the Ministry of Defense and, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These are military objects related to the BPLA, related to the military administration, related to the decision-making center. And this was a reaction to a military crime committed in Ostrobelsk, which could not but remain unanswered. But the first part of the story, they kind of take it aside. They say that Russia is escalating the conflict in order not to allow the emergence of a peaceful solution. And this is another evidence that Russia does not want any peace, although if we look at the facts, they just say that Europe, and I will now focus on this, that Europe is doing everything possible in order not to allow a peaceful solution in Ukraine. Today, Europe is suffering terrible losses from the disconnection of ties with Russia, from the aggression that is not only being introduced into society today, but is also being introduced into economic programs, because if we talk about the essence of what is happening, the preparation of a military confrontation with Moscow covers not only the military sphere, but also the economic sphere, the work with society, the way of life, social issues. And if we talk only about the direct losses related to the disconnection of ties with Russia, first of all in the energy sphere, now specialists are talking about 2 to 3 trillion. But if we talk about the world's dividends, that is, what Europe has gained as a result of the retreat of the Cold War, the exit of the USSR from the Cold War, when the armed forces were shrinking everywhere, and if we talk about Europe, then about 1% of the European armed forces were reduced to more than 1 million people. Real security can only be with Russia, and this is really so, because if we even look at the position of the European Union today, which demands a place at the negotiating table, they always say that Russia does not want negotiations, but the European Union should be at the negotiating table and wants to agree with us on the guarantees of the security of Ukraine. That is, they want to place troops there, Mr. Macron. For some reason, France is ahead of the planet in such a mess. But none of them in the last 2 years has said that part of the peace agreement in Ukraine should be the guarantees of the security of Russia. If we look at the external aspects of the conflict, then this is a key element, how Ukraine cannot and should never be used against the legal interests of Russia. This is the question. Everything will be fine with Kaliningrad, but I will emphasize once again that what is happening is absolutely not our choice. And when they talk about the situation in the Baltic Sea, this is really a laboratory example of how hostile policy can turn any calm region of the world into an arena of such a severe, dangerous, destabilizing, and very fraught with serious consequences of confrontation, as they say in Russian, on the spot.